Welcome to this event titled Faith Forward, Women Brokering Peace in Conflict and Crisis. This CSW parallel event is brought to you by the World Council of Churches, Religions for Peace, and the Lutheran World Federation. I do hope that your engagement at the CSW 65 has been encouraging and inspiring. My name is Isaiah Toroitich. I am the head of global advocacy at the Lutheran World Federation. It is my honor to serve as the moderator of this event today. The objective of this event is to present the case for the inclusion of women of faith in decision-making processes related to peace building at leadership and grassroots levels. Before we continue, let me just repeat the information that has been shared with you a moment ago, that please keep your microphones muted to enable the sound of the event to be clear for all of us. As has been indicated, the session is translated into French and into Spanish. So please select the language that you prefer to follow this event with today. And then again, for comments and questions and suggestions, we invite you to use the chat function that is provided within this platform so that the conversation goes on with your participation as well. I would like to inform you that the meeting, this meeting is recorded, and if you face any particular challenge, technical or otherwise, during this conversation, I invite you to write a direct message to Marcelo or to Nicole or to Christine, who are in the background supporting our event today. Our event is divided into three main segments. The first one is a conversation with two women leaders sharing the reality at the front lines. And the second segment is a panel discussion with four distinguished women leaders on the subject of faith-based roadmap for women in peace building. And the last segment is an idea sharing session where the panelists will offer suggestions on how we can collectively lead institutional change. And for this last session, I will invite all the participants as well to contribute their ideas using the chat function. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your active participation. I would now like to invite Professor Dr. Azza Karam to give the opening remarks. Professor Azza Karam serves as the Secretary General of Religions for Peace, the largest multi-religious leadership platform with 92 national and 6 regional interreligious councils. She is also a professor of religion and development at the Vrije University in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, of which she is a citizen. She served as the senior advisor on culture at the United Nations Population Fund and as coordinator and the chair of the United Nations Interagency Task Force on Religion and Development. She is the founder of the Multi-Faith Advisory Council of the United Nations Interagency Task Force on Religion and Development. Professor Karam, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Isaiah, and thank you very much indeed to our colleagues from the World Council of Churches and the ACT Alliance and all those who have come together to make this event very possible. Given that I am in the presence of giants, women of faith who are every day undertaking remarkable achievements, I just want to limit what I have to say beyond the deepest gratitude and respect for the wisdom of putting this session together. I want to say 3 key points about the theme at hand. In 2000, when I first wrote an article about women in conflict and peace building, at that time, it was a relatively unheard of, meaning unwritten about, not didn't happen, but unwritten about topic. One of the main contentions within that conversation that was taking place, which eventually resulted in Security Council Resolution 1325, one of the main contentions was not so much why include women, but how to include women at the peace table. And because this remains a main point of contention, my argument in this space is that we are now trying to expand the space to women of faith when we are still effectively struggling with the processes of inclusion in spaces of peace building and negotiation. But in truth, we are also trying to make this case, which the European Union and the United Nations jointly tried to also make several years ago in the context of a UN General Assembly meeting. We're trying to make this case, though, at a time when peace processes as a whole are suffering from a process of delegitimacy, of illegitimacy globally. Meaning that the acts of representation, that the processes of representation of the voices of those in conflict in and of itself is seriously flawed. So we're trying to make a case for inclusion when the processes themselves and the institutions themselves that are dealing with processes of conflict and post-conflict reconciliation are deeply flawed. They are flawed because our institutions themselves are facing a crisis of legitimacy like never before. All our institutions, governmental, intergovernmental, and non-governmental. But they are also flawed because experience has shown that it isn't enough to simply include a group of token women, but that at the end of the day, who gets included and how they are selected is the detriment or the success of a process of inclusion. COVID is teaching us all one thing. It is teaching us many things, quite frankly, but amongst the things it is teaching that is quite relevant to this particular space is that it is not enough to pay lip service, meaning it is necessary but insufficient to have global resolutions. Necessary but insufficient. 1325 has given the impetus, the possibility, the narrative, and the opportunities for the inclusion of women around different peacemaking tables. But no UN resolution so far has been adopted in such a way that actually enables a process of representative inclusion of all sectors of society who are hurt. We also know 20 years later that actually, quite frankly, it is not simply women, as in the sex of women, who need to be included. Women of faith can and do make a difference to the arenas that they work in. First of all, we should highlight that women of faith already have been involved, insofar as the women involved in peacemaking processes around the world also profess and acknowledge a particular faith tradition. So it's not as if women of faith have never been included, ever. No, the issue here is not so much the inclusion of women of faith, as it is, how is it that by working together as women and men of faith, we can actually impact on the how of a process of peacemaking and peace building. And I have two suggestions in that regard, and those are my two last points. Suggestion number one, we must be able to acknowledge that there's an added burden today to the processes of inclusion of women in peace building that was not there necessarily 20 years ago when the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 first came out. The added burden today is moral, it is economic, it is financial, it is political, and it is the burden of representativity of those around the table. Why? Because if women of faith are to make a difference to the traditional models of inclusion, then women of faith have to ourselves be the model of how to include. It isn't enough to be there as a woman. It is necessary to be there as a woman representing a wide variety of interests, barring none. Let me say that again. It is important to be at the peace table as a woman representing a wide variety of interests, not just ours, barring none. In other words, it is critical that when and where women of faith are involved in peacemaking processes, we're not just even talking about getting to the peace table, but when and where women are involved in peacemaking and peace building processes, they can speak for the interests of all, barring none. That ability to speak not just out of an interest base of one's own group, whether ethnic or gender or racial or national, that ability to speak to the influence and the intersectionality of all interests of all people is what women of faith have a moral obligation to do, in my humble opinion. Yes, it is a remarkable burden to bear, but it is the burden that has been borne over centuries. If we look at the history of women slaves in the United States of America, we learn one thing: they never fought for their own right as women. They fought for their right as Africans, as women, as slaves, and as subjugated peoples, and as peoples who knew the oppression. They fought as peoples. and they fought with their faith. That is what women of faith need to bring to the table, which also means not only that you have to represent the wide variety of interests and speak and defend and champion the interests of every voice, especially the most vulnerable, because that is what all faiths call upon, but there is an imperative to be able to speak truth to power. And where women can exemplify the ability to stand together, regardless of their gender, race, ethnicity, but stand together because they believe in the power and the intersectionality of all forces of oppression, and therefore in the intersectional power of speaking to all forms of oppression, where women can do that, and women of faith can and have done that historically, that is the tipping point for peace building. Peace building is not just being able to resolve a conflict that is ongoing. Peace building is also serving hunger, serving needs of basic needs. Women of faith are already doing so to the tune of 90% in almost all faith communities around the world. In other words, they don't yet have to earn their right at the table. What they do need to prove is their ability to defend one and all. The intersectional power of our oppression is the intersectional power of the discourse of liberation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Azakaram, for your very, very inspirational opening remarks. You've set indeed a very excellent tone for our conversation. You have indicated that women of faith have something to bring to the conversation, and that women of faith as well have the possibility of setting a model of how to include, and that women of faith and leadership in the context of peace is not just about resolving conflicts. It's about that, but it's also, as you've indicated, about meeting other needs and meeting other human rights. I think this is a really, really great way to enter into the next segment, because we have with us two eminent leaders who have, in their own way and in their own context, already started to set a tone for how women representation in peace building and peace leadership looks like. It is an honor for me to welcome Dr. Sehin Tefera, who is the mother of Rika and Laban and the founder of Sitawet, an Ethiopian feminist movement that works on effecting a shift in consciousness on gender equality by advocating against gender-based violence. Dr. Sehin obtained her PhD in gender studies from the University of Oriental and African Studies in London on Mo Ibrahim Scholarship. Her most current publication is Ethiopia at the Juncture of Political Reform, a Gendered Analysis. I would also like to welcome Dr. Naila Tabara, who is the director of the Institute of Citizenship and Diversity Management at Adian Foundation for Diversity, Solidarity, and Human Dignity. She is the co-president of Religions for Peace. She holds a PhD in Science and Religion from École Pratique des Hautes Études, Paris, and St. Joseph University, Beirut. She is also a Muslim woman theologian and a university professor in religion and Islamic studies. She has published work in the field of Islamic theology and other religions, education on interreligious and intercultural diversity, and Quranic exegesis and Sufism. She works on the curricular development, formal and informal, for multi-faith education and inclusive citizenship. She has received the gold medal of the French Renaissance Award and the Special Jury Award for the further Jacques Hamel Prize in 2019, and the Écriture et Spiritualité Award from her book, L'Islam pensé par une femme. Dr. Sehin and Dr. Naila, you both have such rich experience and knowledge in peace building. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Naila. Could you just share a bit with us about your journey and your work on peace? Over to you, Dr. Naila.
Thank you very much, Isaiah. So as you mentioned, in 2006, I was part of a group of Muslims and Christians, 3 women, 2 men, who co-founded together an organization in Lebanon called Adyan, which means religions in the plural. The aim of our organization is to work for diversity so that people know how to deal positively with diversity. We are in a post-war context, but also all the time we feel that we are in a pre-war or pre-conflict context. So what we need to do is always to be working on the past and preparation also for the future and the now. So mainly what we work on is I mean, allow people to reread the past, to understand also the memory, to recognize the hurt of each other, to meet with each other, hear really each other. And especially that in our part of the world, the conflict was among people belonging to different sects or religious sects. So there is here an intersectionality between religion and faith on the one hand, and the sociological component of each group. So hearing each other, knowing about each other, correcting the image about each other, but also about history, because each one has their own memory, and it's a fragmented, basically, memory. To be able to recognize the pain and the hurt of each one, so that we can build a future together around a common vision. So, and that is what we call inclusive citizenship in our foundation.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring. And as I listen to you mention that the work has to look at the past, it has to look at the present, and it has to look at the future. I wonder for you, Dr. Sahin, how has your work and your journey been when you consider what Naila has shared with us today? Over to you, Sahin.
Thank you, Isaiah, and thank you, Professor Karam, for that wonderful introduction. Such an honor to be here amongst all of you. I think women of faith come to peace work in very similar ways. I think there's a lot of empathy that comes with women organizing as women and as women of faith to do this work. For me personally, I'm the founder of Seytawit, which is the first feminist network in Ethiopia at the current time. We do a lot of work on gender-based violence and particularly on victim blaming. And now with the political process, we're slowly getting into political participation work. But to speak a little bit to the context in which Naila said she's working, it's similar. And I was actually wondering, looking at everybody's bios and wondering how many of the women here or how many of the presenters are working in active conflicts. Because Ethiopia is currently descending into chaos. It's an incredibly painful time for us. It started with conflict here and there, and I'm speaking to you now at a time when my country is descending into something we might not recognize, horizontal conflicts all over and spreading by the day. And obviously this speaks very much to women's gendered experiences of violence. Rape is rampant in a lot of the conflict. And with the all-out war in Tigray region that's made international headlines, we're looking at war crimes where each party in the conflict is really using rape as a weapon of war. So what we're talking about is not theoretical for me. It's happening. It's happening as we speak. We're not ready for it. The peace work that's going on the ground is, I wouldn't even say it's happening yet. What the best that we can do is offer a gendered analysis of what is going on and bear testament to how women are being used as pawns in a conflict that no woman really started. And we do this in the context of a very religious country. I think it was the Telegraph, a newspaper in the UK that did a global poll and found Ethiopia to be amongst one of the most religious countries in the world, if not the most religious. From that poll. So people are incredibly religious, with 30 or 35% Muslim, the rest Orthodox, some Catholics. So we're talking about communities of faith inflicting this kind of violence on other communities of faith. And there's a religious angle to it as well. It's mostly ethnic, but there's definitely a religious angle to it. So that's kind of the context of where we're working. What we're doing in terms of the current conflict is bearing witness, bearing testament to how women are being treated. There's a collection of political leaders and thought makers that meets regularly. It's called Destiny Ethiopia, and I'm honored to be part of that. And we met this last weekend, and everybody was talking about how their groups are impacted. You know, this ethnic group is impacted, and I said I'm here to stand for women of all ethnic groups who are being incredibly violated, and that's often forgotten. And unfortunately, where we talk about women, it's as possessions. Our women are being raped by your men, and really forgetting the human rights aspect of it and the incredible trauma. We're working on a little bit of counseling, because we offer trauma-based counseling in times of peace here in Addis Ababa, and we're looking at trying to expand that to conflict areas, but it's obviously very difficult. I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You paint a very difficult picture when you talk about your context and the current situation in Ethiopia. And I mean, you begin already by sharing some of the difficulties and the challenges you face. And I wonder, from your perspective, Naila, what would you say are some of the barriers that are affecting peace work in your context? Over to you, Naila.
Okay. Thank you, Isaiah. I think the most important barrier, as Sahin was saying, we are in very religious societies. Religion itself or religiosity itself is not the barrier, but it's the identitarianism of the religious belonging. So when people are not taking the values or the spirituality of the religion as the most important, but the identity of the religion as the most important, this helps also gear the attitude toward an attitude of constant victimization. From my context, what we've realized is that all the different groups have gone through periods of very strong feelings of victimization. And when they do, they become aggressors, and very harsh aggressors, because their image of themselves is that, oh, poor they are the victim. And because they are the victim, they are allowed to aggress others because they are victims, and their aggression becomes doubled and tripled and tenfold. So this is a dynamic that I've seen my country go through, and also participate in a conflict in Syria, so neighboring country, similar. So these are the dynamics that I see that are blocking the peace. And for example, currently in Lebanon, we aren't able. The country is going really, we are losing all form of infrastructure. We don't have a government, but the reason why we don't have a government is that identitarianism, and each community wanting their seat at the table and wanting more power to themselves. So it's letting the country all fall. So this is one of the main obstacles for peace building in general. In my context, of course, we have also other obstacles for women participation and women of faith participation.
Thank you. You bring up a concept that is quite interesting. This identity, looking at your identity as a negative form of yourself, so that it makes you something else and sets you apart from the others, which often leads you to seeing the others as the enemy. And I think already you bring some really interesting solution where people of faith can focus very strongly on the faith values and spirituality as resources that could bring peace. And I wonder, from your perspective, Sahin, do you resonate with these ideas in the context of Ethiopia? Over to you, Sahin.
Absolutely, and we're looking at this in real time. As I said, there was a CNN report over the weekend, really kind of indicating war crimes, and what the term they used was practically a genocide. So what's going on with that, to give you a bit of context, is that militias from a certain part of the country, in Amhara in the north, are implicated in rape women in Tigray, the neighboring regions. And this speaks directly to what Naila said about a history of victimization, of feeling like we've been oppressed by your group for the past 30 years. And some of the terminology they spoke of was, speaking to survivors was really disturbing, really implicating genocide, because they were raping the women, saying, you will have babies from us and clean this bloodline that's oppressed us for the last 30 years. Obviously, all wars are played on women's bodies. And I mean, I think this is universal. But the genocidal aspect of it, or the war crime part of it, being played on women and women of faith from both sides, and men of faith really in most parts, was very interesting from an analytical point of view. So religion as an identity, as a group identifier, rather than devoid of the faith or the spirituality aspect, is something we're seeing currently, unfortunately. For our work, I think a major barrier is that there's very little organizing of women. There's no major mass-based women's rights movements, and that's because we've had oppressive governments right throughout our history. Ethiopia's never been in a position to develop a mass-based women's rights movement. So there's really nobody to stand for women as women. And women obviously make up a majority of the religions in this very religious country, a majority of the mosque goers, a majority of the church goers serving in the church, and the Orthodox Church is very conservative, and women don't serve in any leadership positions. There's no room for women. And combined with that, what you have is an absence of a space for women of faith, or really any women, to come together as women, devoid of their ethnic identity. I see a hardening of ethnic identities along the way, and I think that's understandable. When this group attacked us, so people really kind of digging in their heels with their ethnic identities. Even people I know, even in Addis, which is very cosmopolitan, which is the head of is the city of the African Union. So even here you see ethnic identity suddenly becoming very important, and religious identities becoming very important. And with the digging in, you don't really have a feminist or a gender analysis of what that means, or to say I'm standing up for another woman of another ethnic group. So women are forgotten in this. Identity is subsumed, and you have people standing up for their ethnic group, for their religious group, increased religiosity, particularly in Islam, and very conservative forms of the Orthodox Church, which of course speaks to women's ability to organize and speak outside the house. So these are the major barriers I see to peace work in Ethiopia. I'll pause here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's profoundly sad to hear, as you testify, Sahin, about the fact that sometimes war is played on the bodies of women, and that in cases many women are left out of decision making, and in some cases even within our own religious institutions, women do not get their rightful place to provide leadership and decisions. And I wonder if we look a little bit at how some of these challenges could be resolved. What, from your perspective, could you say are some of the answers to these questions, of the solutions to these problems? I will start with you, Naila, first, and then we'll come back to you, Sahin.
Okay. Sahin spoke about, lack of representativity of women in leadership in religions. And I think this is very important for us to have women's representativity, not only politically, but also religiously. We need not only women religious leaders being present on the scenes with men religious leaders, but we also need to promote the interpretation of religion by women. And here, it's very important to say the interpretation of religion in general, and not only about women's issues. This is what Professor Karam was also mentioning in her word at the beginning, because sometimes also women are, as if we limit them, only talk about women's issues. whereas we don't limit men to speak only about men's issues. Women as theologians, as interpreters of religion, should be interpreting all of religion. They should be able to speak about God. They should be able to speak about what the values of faith are, about social theology, political theology, as well as feminist theology. So these are all things to be taken into together, but at the same time also, we need to be working together, women and men, to uncover all the forms of patriarchalism that exist in our societies, and not only in religious culture, but in the general culture, to so that wars and conflicts stop being played on women's bodies, as Sahin was saying. Maybe if I can give you an example of that, or something that happened recently, a few years ago in Egypt, sadly, there was a conflict between two villages, basically, one Muslim and one Christian. They said that a Christian man actually took a Muslim woman and well, okay, they got married, but this became a very big issue. So as a retaliation, the Muslim villagers went and took the Christian lady, took her out on the street and stripped her of her clothes. So this is in a way where we're saying that the honor, our honor was violated because a Muslim woman was taken by a Christian man, and we need to retaliate on on the honor of the Christian village, and their honor is a woman. The whole honor is, so she does not represent herself. She represents the honor of the whole tribe, basically. And these are things that we need to be really facing and working on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. It's really, really incredibly important. And I can already see conversations in the chat room affirming that women's leadership is not leadership for women. It's not leadership only in the context of religion, but it is in the context of the whole of society. I'm going to give you the floor, Dr. Sahin, to just reflect a bit with us on some of the solutions. And then after that, I will give the floor to Professor Karam, actually, to make a bit of a reflection on this conversation as we end our first segment. So over to you, Sahin, and then after that, I will come to you, Professor Karam. Sahin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Isaiah. I think before we talk about the solutions, the context is really important, and I couldn't agree with Naila more, and that honor is personified as a woman. You take this, I'll take that, really dehumanizing human out of their natural properties. I think a big problem with that in Ethiopia is that women are really instrumentalized as peace builders, as peacemakers, even when they have no position or no power to influence. And the narratives coming out of our prime minister can be very disturbing in this regard. Women have been appointed to very high places, and he's openly said that women are appointed because they're loyal, because they're faithful. This very essentialist and quite uncomplicated narratives of women's roles. And he's also said the role of women is to stop their brothers from fighting, obviously really reducing women's agency. So this is problematic. I have, in terms of solutions, I have very strong faith in local forms of peace building, which unfortunately often don't involve women. But if they did, I think these would be the solutions that we're looking for. I'll give you an example. In intercommunal violence in the South last year, the Gamo community had, I think, something like 100 people killed from their community. And because they knew that the youth in their community would go and burn the houses of a neighboring community, what the elders did was they formed a ring around that community. They knelt down in this very traditional form of, in a very submissive way, and begged the youth to not do that. And that stopped it. That stopped that violence from escalating. Unfortunately, when women are asked to play these roles, it's very, again, very essentialist. You see women, going and, kneeling down and begging and crying. And I don't think that helps our position much, because women also need to be writing and speaking and protesting as well as just crying. But I do believe that these are some of the forms of organizing that will move us forward. In terms of long-term solutions, I completely agree with Naila that what we need is better representation. I have very little faith that that's something that's going to happen soon, particularly in our religious communities. Women have no formal positions in the Orthodox Church. Some in the Protestant Church, we have women pastors, but none in the Catholic or Orthodox Church, and certainly not in Ethiopian Islam. But you do see hope here and there. There's a few feminist Muslims who are very active and coming on the scene, and that gives me hope. But I think it will be another generation before we see the fruit of such organizing. In the short term, I think a commitment by our government to bar all forms of violence against women, particularly in conflict, to really prioritize psychosocial counseling, to avail it, to not deny rape happens. It's only really recently, with the pressure from international reporting, that the government has even acknowledged rape exists. Our president, who is really a remarkable woman, she's gone to visit survivors in Tigray, and she's openly spoken that yes, rape is happening in our country. Soldiers are raping our women, and it was an incredibly courageous thing to do, considering she's part of government. So we need to see more of this. We need to see women's leadership actually bear fruit and cause an impact. Thank you, Isaiah.
Oh, thank you very much. It's really, really encouraging to hear about organizing and to hear about calls for better representation, because the more women are represented in leadership positions, that is good for society. It's not just good for women. I can see again that the conversation in the chat room is getting quite heated. There is a lot of wonderful comments and appreciation for your input. And I wonder, Professor Karam, if you have been inspired as I have been, and if you could give us a couple of remarks to close this session. Over to you, Professor Karam.
Dr. Isaiah, you honor me way too much, and I'm very grateful to you for that. I have learned quite a lot from this discussion and conversation between Dr. Shaheen and Naila. And honestly, I'm not quite sure that there's much to be added, given that they have covered it from so many different wonderful angles: political, social, and cultural, and leadership, and so on. I actually thought, perhaps rather than a concluding thing, but maybe just a couple of thoughts for us to take with us as we move to the next session of also remarkable women representation. I really do have to compliment you and to commend you and the team that have put this together for the selection of this most awesome group of women. Thank you. I do want to share a couple of questions for us to ponder. The first question is, we argue for the need to have women represented at senior leadership levels, including within the religious institutions. And there is no question that that is indeed what we need. But the question here is, what kind of skills and what kinds of arguments do we ideally want to have these senior women leaders within the religious establishment and outside? What kind of skills do we need to make sure they have? And what kind of narratives do we also need to hear and equip them with? Because we already know that at the beginning of the 20th century, the call for women to be represented in legislative and executive spaces was exactly as we are now making the case for the religious spaces. And we have had many women now, far fewer than necessary, but women in leadership positions per se. Is that a sufficient dynamic, or is it the kinds of narratives, the kinds of arguments, the kinds of actions that we are particularly looking for? And it's a deeply unjust question, because it presupposes that women have to do more as leaders than the traditional man does. And I'm really sorry to say that is true. It's an unjust expectation, but at the same time, ours is the burden of making a difference, to be honest. And I think if we don't exemplify the difference that needs to be made to the narrative and the discourse, then we will be seeing a lot of the same. perpetuated by women religious leaders as women other leaders. So I think it's the nature of the narratives that we need to be conscious of. And the question that I would warn us about is, as we argue for more women of faith or more faith, we in different spaces of contention and conflict and peace building are the most contentious, we must be wary of the fact that we are also confronting a phenomenon of the religionization of politics and the politicization of religion. And there's no way that we can have our cake and eat it, that if we're arguing for more religion, we are also arguing for more contention, and the religious becomes a sphere of contention. So how do we therefore become more mindful in terms of what it is that we're actually trying to do? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Aza. And indeed, as you said at the beginning, we are in the midst of giants. We are in the midst of leaders who have shown every single day in their contexts at local, national, regional, and global level that leadership in peace building is something that women can do and do very well. I would like to just thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Sehin, Dr. Naila, for your inspiring stories, for your commitment, and for your depth of knowledge. And thank you as well, Professor Karam, for your leadership. This has been indeed an eye-opening session, and we really, really appreciate your participation and your contribution. Dear participants, we shall now swiftly move to the second segment of our event today, which is about faith-based roadmaps for women in peace building. We are indeed honored to have with us a panel of distinguished women leaders from different sectors and from different parts of the world. I'm going to introduce them first, and then we will go into the substantive conversation. So our first panelist will be Ms. Amanda Kozi Mukwashi, who has devoted more than 25 years to working on poverty alleviation, tackling injustice and inequalities. She has worked in both intergovernmental and non-governmental spaces, bringing in-depth experience from across the development sector. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Christian Aid, leading development and humanitarian interventions in Africa, in Asia, and the Middle East, in Latin America, and in the Caribbean. Amanda has also served with the United Nations under the United Nations Volunteer Program in Germany as Chief, Volunteer Knowledge and Innovation, and Chief of Advisory Services. Prior to this, she worked for VSO International, the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa in Zambia, and the UNFPA Zambia Country Support Program on Gender, Population, and Development. She has served as a trustee for Bond and as president of Akinamamo Africa. Amanda is a published author. But where are you really from is her first book. And I have actually had the pleasure of reading this book because it's very, very interesting. I highly recommend it to you all. And she has a master's degree in international economic law from the University of Warwick and a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Zambia. Amanda, welcome to our event. Our second panelist is Reverend Gloria Ujo, who is a pastor, teacher, and academic coordinator. She has served as the chaplain of the American College of Barranquilla for 15 years, coordinator of pastoral team and diaconia coordinator. Reverend Gloria has been actively involved in ecumenical work since 1981 with the Latin America Council of Churches, CLAI, and the World Council of Churches. She serves as the representative of the Presbyterian Church in the Ecumenical Network of Colombia. From 2007 to 2011, Reverend Gloria was a member of CLAI Colombia Board. She was instrumental in the creation of the Ecumenical Program for Peace in Colombia at the World Council of Churches, and she is an honorary member of the Women's Program and a former peacemaker with the Presbyterian Church of the United States. Currently, Reverend Gloria Ujo is the director of the Department for Women of the Mayor's Office of Barranquilla, the president of the Superior Council of the General Chamber of Reformed University Corporation. Reverend Gloria is the 2013 to 2021 Latin America and the Caribbean president of the World Council of Churches. Welcome, Reverend Gloria, to our panel this afternoon. Our third panelist is Ms. Ranjinta Christi Burgwari, who is from Korjahar, Assam, and is a member of the Northern Evangelical Lutheran Church in India. She studied a master's in social work with the specialization of community development from Ahmednagar of Pune University in Maharashtra. Forgive me for the difficult words. She received training on gender and worked with the Lutheran World Federation India Trust Emergency Project and at Bongaigaon Jena Seva Society as program coordinator for rural women empowerment. She believes that all women should be given equal dignity, status, and leadership and participation within the diverse ministries of the church and in society. Ranjita joined the Community Development Center of the Union Biblical Seminary, and she is currently the Women's Desk Secretary for the United Evangelical Lutheran Church in India, working for women's emancipation and gender programs. She accompanies the Lutheran World Federation in the ministries such as the Gender Advisory Group and coordinating as Executive Council member of the Lutheran World Federation, International Referent Group member on gender of the Archchurch of Sweden. Welcome to our panel this afternoon, Ranjinta. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Ms. Mira Naime, who is a professional and a public sworn translator. Both her bachelor's degree and master's degree are from St. Joseph University, and they are in translation studies, multilingual. Mira speaks several languages, including French, Arabic, English, and Spanish, and with some good proficiency in German. Before her education at the World Student Christian Federation, before her position at the World Student Christian Federation in the Middle East, she worked as a translator for Credit Lebanese. She also has 6 years worth of experience in technical writing and translation at Path Solution, a fintech digital solution provider. In 2017, Mira was invited as a guest speaker on the World Council of Churches panel at the United Nations 61st Commission on the Status of Women. Through the Orthodox Youth Movement, Mira is a member of the World Student Christian Federation Board. And from 2013 to 2017, she acted as a proxy on the regional committee. And in September 2018, she was elected into her current position as regional executive for the World Student Christian Federation. I would like to once again welcome you, Mira, to the panel, and we will go right into our conversation. And I'm going to give the floor to Amanda. And Amanda, I would like to find out from you, in situations where women's peace and security are threatened, what is the responsibility of the international community, and what is the specific responsibility of people of faith? Over to you, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Isaiah. Can you hear me all right? Am I clear?
Loud and clear, thank you.
Thank you so much. A big question that you asked me, but I think before I even attempt to answer it, I wanted really to thank Azza, Naila, and Sahin in terms of the things that the issues that they flagged up. I think this whole conversation could have really just been about that, and we would still be talking. In particular, I want to pick up a few things which I think are going to be part of my response. I think the issue of religious people inflicting violence on each other, I think is a profound statement that Naila made that must cause all of us to be very uncomfortable indeed. I think the conversation around values and identity is a very interesting one. And because what I heard was not that we shouldn't have an identity, because as women of faith, we have an identity, but it is when the identity takes over our values or moves away from our values, that it becomes a toxic identity. And just reflecting on some of those things that we talked about, I hope that in the last segment, we'll be able to talk about the issue of power and money, because as people of faith, as religious groups, we are not immune to the issue of power and money. So coming to just quickly on thinking about the situation of women's peace and security and when it is threatened, when you consider the responsibility of the international community and of people of faith, the first thing is that people of faith are also part of the international community. So, you know, we have multiple identities as people of faith. And so there's quite a lot that I could actually talk about at the moment. But one of the key areas of responsibility for me is really to ensure that there's a comprehensive and transformative approach that addresses the root causes of violence, you know, both in humanitarian crisis sparked by violence and longer-term peace building work. Because I think unless we get to the bottom of it, you know, some of the issues that the previous speakers have been talking about will persist. So let me just give you a few data points. A British Council Peace Perceptions poll of 2018 reported that 90% of respondents in conflict-affected countries regarded economic inclusion as fundamental to peace and security. The need to be able to provide for one's family, a sense of injustice. These were some of the most common reasons why people turn to violence, right? A broken economic system exacerbates the precarious situation in which many women find themselves, right? As violence rises across the globe, military spending is also continuing to rise. Along with the estimated value of global arms transfers, an unfolding crisis of arms control that has now become chronic and is increasingly toxic, global geopolitics and regional rivalries. I think it's just important for us to think about some of those things in terms of the context in which the violence is taking place. World military expenditure is estimated to have accounted for at least 2.2% of world gross domestic product, or in sort of dollars and cents, $249 per person worldwide. I mean, this is actually quite a difficult place for us to be in. The emphatic conclusions of women in the 2015 global study, which was conducted on the impact of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, were that there must be an end to the present cycle of militarization within its unprecedented levels of military spending, and that armed intervention by the international community and member states must only be the last resort, right? It's really important that when you look at this study, it chronicled how militarization of society breeds new levels of violence and how impunity for these crimes becomes endemic. And so I think when we talk about what the international community can do, let's just broaden this conversation to the fundamentals that sit behind women's experiences. You know, what is the full range of the needs and the full spectrum of our human rights, right? Whether it's poverty, injustice, food insecurity, these things are really critical. What are those causes that produce the vulnerability and exposure to that violence in the first place, right? And until we're able to actually address those root causes, we will not be able to achieve what we need, right? So too often, we end up focusing on the violence. And please hear me quite well. I am not saying that the focus on the violence is wrong, right? What I'm saying is that we end up focusing completely on the violence and not really looking at the root causes of the violence, right? Unless we are prepared to address the fundamental linkages between poverty, inequality, and violence. Can I just give a quick example and then I'll stop? If you look at, let's say, two countries, right? If you look at in DRC, a huge amount of attention went on sexual violence, which, while important, ignores the fact that women's experiences of the continuous conflict in the Eastern DRC were marked by poverty, psychological trauma, threat to life, loss of loved ones, dispossession, displacements, lack of access to basic services. Women bear acute caring and childbearing responsibilities in the Eastern DRC, right? They're the ones who work in the fields. They're the ones who sell crops in the market. They're the ones who ensure survival of their families. And yet many women are forced into the informal economy, and particularly cross-border trading as a way of survival, which leaves them very vulnerable to systematic abuse and harassment, right? Afghanistan is another example. The international community often only discusses women in Afghanistan as victims of violence. Levels of gender-based violence and inequality are key issues. But by only focusing on this, we fail to see the full spectrum of how their human rights are violated and how they experience conflict. Despite the violence and insecurity, women navigate the economy and a lack of access to services and resources. They resort to survival in whatever way they can, cultivating illicit drugs, migration, reliance on aid. The presence of insurgents and their control over economic resources compounds inequality, particularly for women and girls, who are sometimes sold as assets to settle debts. So what am I saying when you ask me the question around the role and responsibility of the international community? There are many different responsibilities, but the one that I want to focus on for today's conversation is a comprehensive and transformative approach that addresses the root causes of violence. As to the issue of people of faith, I wish we had more time to go into that, because we have double standards as people of faith. Because when we talk about including that women must be listened to, if women are not listened to within our religious groups, if we're not sitting at the table of decision making in our own religious groups, it becomes really difficult for us to be then brought into the decision-making tables and spaces in issues of peace and security. And so we have to do both. I will come to that when I come in again later on, but it is an area that I would really like to explore, that we have a duty and a responsibility as people of faith, as institutions of faith, to practice that which we want to see happening in the peace and security space. Let me stop there for now, because I think I've gone over my 5 minutes, but thank you very much for the opportunity and the privilege, Isaiah.
Thank you so much. I find this extremely, extremely helpful and extremely useful, making sure that the international community's response to peace and to conflict is not divided into little simplistic approaches that isn't comprehensive. Peace work needs to respond to poverty, injustice, inequality, rights, and other things. So thank you for making that really, really clear to us. And thank you as well for challenging our faith communities because of the double standards that are at play at the moment. I would like to give all of us the apologies from Reverend Gloria Ujo, who's not able to join us because of technical issues, but she will definitely be able to be part of this conversation at a later stage. So I will give the floor immediately to Ranjinta, who will talk to us a little bit about the kind of support that is needed to end violence that is targeted at women and children. And I think from your intervention, Ranjinta, you will be able to talk to us as well from the perspective of faith leadership. So over to you, Ranjinta.
Thank you, Isaiah. I'm really thankful to Lutheran World Federation for this time that was given to me as part of support to end the violence against women and children. I would like to start with, in conflict situation, women are targeted always as victims or survivors of the violence. Yes, women and girls, children are the one who suffers most during the conflict. But women are the agent of peace and the peacemakers that let us remember again and again in our journey. In ending violence against women and children, we need a leader with the vision and passion for justice and peace, one who walks the talk. Because as a Lutheran World Federation woman, I would like to say that in our Lutheran Communion member churches, we have witnessed, we have heard the stories how women and young girls are suffering in day-to-day life, especially in this COVID-19 situation, in the pandemic situation. Many women became homeless. Many single mothers destitute. They are struggling for food and their shelter. Because of that, they became a victim or the survivor of violence against women. But in this kind of situation, the women coming forward to help each other. But when women come forward, we always look for the support that leadership allows to do some of the work that is needed for the women. So what I would like to say is that we need the support from the leaders as a faith-based organization, providing enough and safe space for women and children to express their concern and their abilities without any patriarchal norms. Because the society where we live is purely dominated by the patriarchal society systems and structures. So we need a leader to educate people about human identity, dignity, as created in the image of God. As a faith-based organization, as a faith-based leader, as a women leader and a male leader, we need to speak for a justice and work for a justice. And we need to explain and teach the human values and ethics, morality with Christian and ethical values. That is very much important for us as a member of the faith-based community to end the violence against women. And as a Lutheran World Federation, we strongly participate in bringing or in producing gender justice policy. The policy which is very much important for our churches, especially we encourage our Lutheran World Federation member churches to have their own gender justice policy as per their own context. But that policy should not be as a book to keep in the library, but with the proper implementation, with the proper code of conduct, and with the real complaint response mechanism that do not suppress the women, but give justice to a woman. That code of conduct in every institution and churches with proper complaint response mechanism is very much needed. And we need a leader who listen and act for the justice, not only supporting in a talk, but also in action. And to end this violence against women and children, we need the leaders must engage themselves in all activities as a model for others. The most important thing is that as a faith-based leader, first we need to encourage our people to change our mindset that women are lower than a man. Women are the object that can be used, so they are always treated as a victim, not as a human being, and not given the opportunity to serve as a leader in the church, in the society. We have many women pastors, those who are still deprived of leadership. They are not given opportunity. There are women who are able to take part as a higher position leadership, but because of the patriarchal system and structure, they're struggling to come up for the leadership position. And surely people of faith can play a driving force in bringing gender justice and equal identity if we work together as a people of faith, not only a woman, but people of all genders together, we need to work. And as a powerful tool for the people of faith, the speaking from the pulpit, teaching the people that women and men are created in the image of God, that women are not an object to be victimized today. Women are not safe at home, neither at the workplace, neither at the school, or in the travel, in the open place, women are not safe. So as a faith-based leaders, we can speak out from our pulpit to the members of the congregation to respect women, to respect the girl child, that women are also the real creation or in the image of God. We also have a breath that we are breathing day to day life. Why are we women are suffering still for the identity only because of the mindset of our leaders today? No, I'm not speaking only a male leaders, it's a women leader as well. We need to work hand in hand together. And as a people of faith, I would like to encourage again and again that there should be a proper system and structure that encourages women and men to share the equal position, equal status, and support that policy and system that create equal space with justice and harmony, because women are not only a sufferer, but women are the warrior for peace. Where men cannot reach, women can reach. I would like to end my saying by giving an example of a woman pastor. There is a place where male pastors cannot go and take care of the congregation in the areas where men cannot travel. A tribal women, Adivasi women are traveling there, and they're taking care of the church with risking their life. Our women are not capable to be in the leadership position, or still do we look at women only as a sufferer, or we treat women only as a victim or survivor? No, today we need to change our mindset. When we will sense the mindset, when are we going to safeguard our women and the young girls at this difficult situation? Thank you, Isaiah.
Thank you so much, Ranjita, for those wonderful inputs to this conversation. You've indicated that we need to challenge the mindset, the patriarchal mindset that sees women only as victims and as survivors. And you've said that we need to invest in putting together safe spaces for women to provide leadership in the context of peace building and peace work. And you've also indicated that we need policies, and policies that can be and must be implemented to be able to change the situation. This is really helpful, and we thank you for that. And I would like to give the floor to Mira, who will talk to us a little bit about some of the unique challenges and opportunities and lessons learned that prohibit women in peace processes. Mira, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope that my voice is clear.
Loud and clear.
Thank you. Thank you, Isaiah. Thank you, everyone. Well, the first part of the webinar was really eye-opening. So I would like to thank the panelists that were with us. Second, I would love to start by some things that we usually say. It is said that peace processes that involve women are more likely to last. And this is why people support a new network. Let me emphasize on new, a new network of women mediators to increase the participation of women in peace processes and mediation, be it at a local or national or global level. Second, I want to also shed the light on something. It is also said that the motivation to increase the number of women in peace building is based on the assumption that women peacekeepers enhance the access of local women to services, improve community relations, reduce incidents of sexual and gender-based violence, build the capacity of local women, and break down traditional views that discriminate and marginalize women. Well, this is what it is said. This is what I don't like. Not just because we are women, we should do this. As a human being, as a Christian human being, this is what we should be doing. The discrimination that we are facing is about emphasizing on certain roles of women that are the complete opposite of the roles of men. But what my church and my faith taught me is that we are equal. We are equal in terms of faith, in terms of duties, and in terms of serving the Lord. So this is why we, as human beings, as Christians working in faith-based organizations and the ecumenical field, we should be aware that it's not just because we are women we should be doing this. It's because we are Christians that we should be doing this. Gender-based violence is something refused, be it from men or women. So this is what we should emphasize on. What I personally think the gifts of a woman, the gifts are the sustainability and her different perspective to the issues that we face usually. And it's about lying a leadership model that takes into consideration the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And for this, we should remember that the ones who shared the good news were women. So this is what we can emphasize on. We should be recognizing each other's efforts. We just take women efforts for granted, like you should be doing this and more and this is not enough. And we expect her to excel in so many tasks that in one task a man cannot excel. And this is the kind of discrimination we should be tackling. It's about having equal opportunities and equal work and equal efforts to be emphasized on. Also, they should be fairly represented. We should be fairly represented. It's always that we need a man's voice to be able to be heard. I talk from a personal experience. We always need that. I'm not gonna just talk about me being in a faith-based organization, but me as Mira, I am a municipality member. One woman and 8 men. The youngest is my dad's age. So sometimes they don't listen. They don't take you into consideration because they think that you are not enough. And this is the thing that we have been grown to believe. You are not enough. And even if you are enough, your efforts are not being recognized, not just by your community, but by yourself. It's always that we question ourselves. Are we enough? Are our efforts enough for our community? Are we doing a good job? Are we spreading the word? Are we really showing what faith is about? And this is the big question that we should tackle, and we should start from the grassroots level. We cannot change our leaders, be it political or religious. We cannot change them. What we can change is the grassroots level. We should be working with youth and school students whom they would be able to have the input to change. We always know that the head won't change because of historical issues, historical things that we must take into consideration when we want to tackle women leadership, be it in church or otherwise. This is why we should tackle the grassroots levels, and we should be freeing our women from the limitations. We always set boundaries. We always expect them to strive more and do more. And this is why those limits put by men and women should be abolished. What I want to emphasize on is 2 main things. It's education and awareness. Awareness about the human role and the Christian role in his society. And when we reach a point that Christians, be them women or men, are equal within spreading their faith, now we can be sure that they would be equal in the different aspects of life. And second, it's about education. We merely educate our youth about common things. We always discriminate. This is to be done by you. This is to be done by you. We should have an equal opportunity of education. the role of women in society and in church is a catalyst. And we should be aware of this. Especially in the peace building process, it's true that the peace building is a unisex issue. It's not a gender-based issue, but we have taken it to the next level. It shouldn't be based on gender. It's a humanitarian thing. And the gender intersectionality with the different social aspects should be tackled in different ways. I would have wished if we had more time to discuss it, but due to the time constraints, I would just like to shed the light on some amazing women in the Middle East that have led peace building processes in a very male conservative environment. I would like to say the name of Reverend Najla Kassab and Reverend Rima Nasrallah, as well as Mary Mikhail and many more women who always strive to be the voice of faith in this society and to lead by heart. This is what we want. We want leaders by heart, be it women or men. And when one leads by heart and by faith and by the Bible, they won't ever look if he's a man or a woman, because he will have something stronger than his gender or sex or ethnicity, or he will have something bigger than himself, than the material self. He will have the eternal with him. And when we talk religion, and when someone talks about core points, it doesn't matter if it's a man or woman. We're talking about important things. And it's just that we have to be aware that we are a prophetic voice wherever we are. And when we are aware that this prophetic voice is going to be heard, then we will be aware of our stance as a human being, thus as a Christian, as a woman. Thank you, Isaiah.
Thank you so much, Mira, and thank you for being a prophetic voice to us today. Thank you particularly for highlighting the role of education and awareness, and thank you for giving us also a specific perspective from a young woman leader, because sometimes the challenges that young women leaders face are even more compounded. So we really, really appreciate your input today. Dear participants, we have reached the end of our segment, our second segment, and we are going straight forward to our last segment, in which our panelists will be joined by Sehin for a brainstorming session. And this is where we will generate ideas very much related to how we can lead to change. How can institutions change in order to influence peace building and peace work? And participants, you are now also invited to join in the conversation. Please contribute your ideas using the chat function. But I will start right away with Amanda. Amanda, how, in your opinion and in your experience, might collaboration between governments, global agencies, faith-based organizations, civil society organizations, and all the other stakeholders, how can they include women in leadership? Over to you, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Isaiah. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. And I think that there's several ways. And maybe I could highlight maybe 2 or 3, right? I mean, we definitely know that the evidence shows us that when women are engaged in peace building and peace processes, that it is game changing. I think an earlier speaker, the previous speaker mentioned that peace is 35% more likely to last at least 15 years when women are at the negotiating table. You know, for example, we remember that in Guatemala, leading up to the signing of the 1996 Accords, women made up 13% of negotiating teams. Women's economic, political, and social rights were included in the majority of the accords, right? This is the result of the direct participation of women. And of course, there were, although certain provisions of the peace accords were successfully implemented, little progress has been made in addressing the root causes. But so that I think the international community, together with the different groups that you've mentioned, need to collaborate to ensure that women are engaged in those processes. Let me break it down a little bit more so that we can be, let's go to tangible things, right? Because of, Christian Aid, we work across different countries. We've seen some of our work in Colombia with some of our partners contributing to the peace agreements. And we've seen that faith actors are crucial in the quest for dignity, equality, and justice for all. So all that is not arguable. But I think the point that I want to land on is it's that question of the double standards. And I think Sahin, who is still online, talked about the interpretation of religion. Okay, let's not forget that, at least from a Christian perspective, and I know these interfaith conversations here, but from a Christian perspective, let's not forget that it was the interpretation of the scriptures that led to the slavery, the justification, the rationalization that Black people were less, always subhuman, okay? It is the interpretation of religion that means that in India, the Dalit community are considered subhuman. So, we could go religion after religion after religion. And what we see is that we have a need, an absolute essential need, to clean out, to put our house in order, right? When we put our house in order, right, then we can start talking about prophetic voice and having a strong prophetic voice that calls everybody else to collaborate. So the first thing I think that we need to do as people of faith is to collaborate around challenging the patriarchal system, the power, the oppression, and the practices, the norms, our theologies, the theologies that suggest that some people are less human than others, or they're second-class citizens. I think that's one of the things that we need. And if we can offer that to the mainstream, I think that they will take us seriously, both upscale in terms of policymakers, decision makers, governments, as well as downscale in terms of the trust that people of faith and none have in us as faith actors. So that will be one of the things that I think is critical for us in terms of collaboration, right? Isaiah, tell me if you think I've taken too long, because I just have one more.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so I think we are uniquely placed as faith-based organization to hold those in power to account through shining a light on these double standards of the international community, because the same kind of double standards that we have in faith, in religious groups, right, is the same double standards that the international community has. So, for example, right, we have governments that I talked earlier on about the militarization, right, about militarization. We have governments who are increasing their arms trade, right, supporting the same countries that will go out and cause conflict and violence in other parts of the world, right? We cannot continue to do that. We cannot continuously increase our spending and arming different governments and different groups, right? And at the same time, talk about reducing the incidence of conflicts and violence. That has to be addressed. And at the end of the day, in both those spaces, in the religious space as well as in the non-religious space, it all boils down for me to the issue of power and the issue of money. And I think that that power, the abuse, the exploitation of power leads to massive injustice, massive inequalities, right? So that it becomes a vicious circle where people are in poverty, they're in extreme poverty, they've experienced violence, and then they're desperate. And then desperate people end up doing desperate things. And so at some point, we have to break that cycle. And we break that cycle by ensuring that we're not fueling the violence by the decisions and the choices that we make. So I just wanted to bring those two things. I'm sure there are other ways that we can go into and talk about in terms of how else we can collaborate. But women need to, no, let me revise that. Women must be listened to. And it's not just women that are sitting at the big tables at policy level. Women in communities must be heard. And we really need to challenge ourselves. I'm challenging myself coming from an NGO, international NGO, in our own practices. When we are in those, we are working in Ethiopia. We're working with, for example, with the groups of internally displaced people, right? We need to hear them. They must be listened to. They have solutions. And I think that's one of the other things that is really important in terms of, let's collaborate on that. How do we ensure that they're not just being heard by civil society organizations, but they're being heard by government, by the UN, by all critical players and actors, by religious leaders and religious actors, right? I don't believe that there's any religion, by the way, and this is my last comment, I don't believe that there's any religion that at its very heart, in terms of its values, really was set out to oppress and treat women the way they're being treated today. I think that's the interpretation of one social group by another social group. And I think we need to challenge that. I'll stop that.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And you have quite powerfully explored the big challenge of double standards, which is out there in the international community at grassroots level, but also in religious communities. And you have given some really, really helpful ideas around how we must challenge the interpretation of scripture and the interpretation of religion that leads to discrimination and that leads to women not being allowed their rightful place, not being given their rightful place of leadership. So thank you for that. And I'm going to come to you, Dr. Sahin, once again, because I think, as Amanda indicated, it would be necessary to make sure that women's participation is a must. And I would like to hear from you, what are some of the ideas that you are coming up with that are being generated at the level of the work that you do in Ethiopia as far as the inclusion of women is concerned? Sehen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Isaiah. And I completely agree with everything that Amanda just said. Unfortunately, in Ethiopia, we're very far away from feminist interpretations of any religious text. If anything, I see a more conservative interpretation of all kinds of scriptures, an increased visible religiosity in our government. As you know, Ethiopia has a secular constitution and Ethiopia is secular in practice. But I think the visible increased kind of leeway that's given to religious institutions really kind of tighten the space in which one would have been able to negotiate feminist interpretations. And as I mentioned earlier, it's women's role is very limited and it's not even really discussed, particularly within Ethiopian Islam and Ethiopian Christianity. The Protestant churches being somewhat a little bit of an exception. Notably, our First Lady is a pastor, she's a Protestant pastor. So you do have visible women of faith, but that doesn't necessarily equate religious interpretations discussing or problematizing gender relations. Amanda mentioned listening to women across all spaces. Of course, as feminists all over the world, we're used to women having to bring their own folding chairs when we're not invited to the big meetings. We're used to that. And Ethiopia may be a little bit more repressive than other countries in the sense that's actually quite common to see all men panels, and something we as a feminist group always try to push. for basic representation, even to have a seat at the table, and particularly for women in communities, as opposed to just women, sitting in Addis and actually having a voice in how policies formulated. I strongly believe that it's not enough to include women in discussions. I think we need women-led and women-majority organizations, and we need feminist organizations, even those led by men. And we have a few in Ethiopia. We need those in the conversation, and we need them to engage with communities of faith in these discussions, and particularly in peace building. As I mentioned earlier, Ethiopia is incredibly religious, so anything that's spoken of, anything that's kind of given credit by religious elders will automatically move forward. Here, I'd like to share an example of how faith leaders from all religious backgrounds were instrumental in addressing HIV 10, 15 years ago, and I'm sure that's the experience in many countries. It's really when faith leaders started talking about ARVs. It's okay to take your ARVs even when you're on a spiritual journey, or when they talked about testing, or when they openly would go and get tested themselves. It really changed how people understood HIV/AIDS. And I think it's the same for peace. And I think it's the same when you try to address gender-based violence. It's really important that faith leaders, which is a group comprised of only men in Ethiopia, but are aware and they're sensitive to the way that women are impacted by conflict. I'm not saying it's happening now, but it's really kind of a wish list of ours to be able to engage faith leaders in this kind of narrative. And there are a few, of course, there are a few faith leaders who are very open to work on peace from the angle of gender-based violence. Let me stop here. Thank you, Dr. Isaiah.
Thank you very much appreciated. And I will actually go right to Ranjinta, from your perspective as well, in your context in India, and being part of a faith community, being very active at the national, regional, and international level in terms of gender policies and gender justice. What, from your perspective, Ranjinta, are some of the most critical ideas to ensuring that women are included in all levels, at all levels of leadership in the context of peace work? Over to you, Ranjinta.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to agree what Sister Amanda has said about the biblical interpretation that stops women coming up for the leadership, even including as well as in the ordination. Because of the biblical interpretation, many women are not able to get ordination. And when the churches have come up with a women ordination, from my own diocese, from my own church, for ordaining a woman, 6 congregations has left the church, says that we are not part of this journey. Only because the churches have added in the policy that women also is a part of our church ministry. And when we speak about the gender justice policy, sometimes our church leaders, after knowing, not only the leaders, even in the congregation members, after knowing about the gender equality and justice, now the resistance is growing higher. The resistance is growing higher because women are coming up more for the theological education. They're seeking for the permission from the church leaders so that they get the theological education and can equally be part of the church leadership or for the ministry. Many young women are encouraged now, but we have been encouraging, insisting, especially in my country, we have a 12 member churches. We call it United Evangelical Lutheran Churches in India. And through Lutheran World Federation, we have translated the gender justice policy into our 4 regional languages. So to call Tamil, Telugu, Hindi, and 3 languages, Tamil, Telugu, Hindi. And then together in order to make our congregation members to understand more about the gender-based violence that are going on and that is rapidly increasing, we have translated the social message published by the Evangelical Lutheran churches in America, which is now very much important, and then it is really helping for us to reflect the Bible story. For example, the Tamar stories, the Deborah and other women, those who are really showing the path to the women and men. And we are having a dialogue only with the men peers group also, before we discuss together with men and women. First, we meet the women separately, men separately, and then we bring men and women together to discuss about the gender equality and justice and how to stop the gender-based violence that are going on. Will this gender justice policy will be helpful, or this gender justice policy will be, as I said before, as a policy without any implementation or without any action? But we, the Lutheran Communion women in India, we are arguing, we are raising our voice that all the churches should have their own gender justice policy. Not only because that women need a leadership, but we need the women should be recognized and respected as a human being. And also, I would like to say that out of 12, like 11 are now slowly agreeing to have a gender justice policy and women ordination, but one church, they are not willing to part of that only because of the Missouri Synod connection, because they don't ordain a woman. So the young people, those who study and those who are the members of India Evangelical Lutheran Church, they're coming to the other church and getting ordination. For that, I appreciate the church leadership that recognizing the young girls or the women coming from the India Evangelical Lutheran Church, but giving ordination and giving the leadership thing. And also, I would like to share with you one of the church that is Bodo Evangelical Lutheran Church under the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Himalayan says. They came to us and they asked that we please help us to re-amend our constitution as per the gender justice policy of Lutheran World Federation. Since we are the member of Lutheran World Federation, we want to amend our constitution. So it is amended. Now they are trying to practice it. Yeah. Doing an amendment of the constitution is not a big thing, but practicing is a very important part now to follow up. How does our churches will follow the policies and also keep the code of conduct to respect the women and recognize the girl child to have a better education, encouraging for the higher studies. Thank you, Isaiah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to give the floor to Mira as well, because I think from your perspective, you've already indicated to us some of the unique challenges that young women leaders face. And it would be really helpful to hear from you what are some of the ideas for ensuring their participation. Over to you, Mira.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm sorry, but I had a small electricity cut. So this is why I was out of sight for a moment. So yeah, again, thank you so much. Well, the most important thing is to never let go. So it's always to stand there and be there. I honestly cannot recall. I read in the messages that someone said about leadership and so on. He was thanking me, so I thank him again. And I would say that me as Mira, being in a leadership position, be it in the municipality or in the WSTF, we face a lot of challenges. First of all, because of the age, I'm young. I have been in my position as executive. I was 28 years old. I was in my position as municipality member. I was 25 years old. So first of all, it's the age. Second, the knowledge. It is said in the Bible that let no one treat you as, I cannot recall exactly the verse, but as really young. We all of us, we do have the knowledge. The knowledge is within us and we have to use it. The challenges are a lot be it gender-based, age-based. It's about everything, but it's about what you decide to convey. It's about what Mira decides to say today. It's about standing for what's right, even if it's the end of my duty. It's staying there, even with all the obstacles, just to be there for the young women that will be coming afterwards. I won't lie if I say that I have thought many times of leaving anything that has to do with leadership and so on, because sometimes you just feel that you're tired and you cannot keep up. But then you go back to yourself and you think at night, if I do leave, what kind of message am I going to be conveying to those coming after me? How will I be an impact for the girls, for the women and men that want to be the change in the world? What can I do, me as a human being? No one is not facing problems, but it's about our perspective of the problems and the challenges, and how do we perceive them, and how do we react upon them. So it's not always about reacting, it's about acting. It's about trying to look at the whole image from a very holistic point of view. It's about seeing the problem and trying to understand why it was there from the very beginning. It's not about Mira, it's not about a woman in the leadership, it's not about my age. It's about a certain mentality that we have to overcome, and we cannot overcome the mentality by sitting at home saying that we give up. I refuse to give up, not just for my sake, but for the sake of everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you gave up, what a disservice it would be to whole community. So thank you for your courage and for your boldness. We are already receiving comments and questions, which thankfully you have responded to them, Mira, and also Ranjinta, you've responded to the question about the role of ordination of women. There are two outstanding questions that haven't been answered, which I will pose to Amanda and to Sehin. And unfortunately, we are running out of time. As with all good conversations, time is a limited resource. But I will come to you, Amanda, with a question that we've received from Sunita, who is asking, how do we ensure that a diversity of women are taking part in leadership, so that all young women, older women, Black women, white women, educated, grassroots, international, how do we make sure that the representation of a diversity of women is ensured in leadership? So I'm going to ask that to you, Amanda, and if you can handle that within a minute, that would be fantastic. Over to you, Amanda.
Okay, thank you. I'm assuming that that's a broader question than just the diversity of women in peace processes. I think, Sunita, I think it's a very difficult question to answer, actually. You know, I could answer it theoretically in terms of, you know, all the things that we know, we need to educate more women, we need to create more spaces for women and so on. But the reality is, having taken the journey myself as a Black woman on leadership, once you get into that leadership space, the battle doesn't stop. And, your resilience is tested on a daily basis, right? And so you ask yourself the question, do I want to be in this space every day? Do I want to be in this space? Because every day you are having to battle, not just the fact that you're a woman, but that you are a diverse woman, right? And so that would be my gut instinct in terms of an answer. But like Mira said, do we then give up? No, of course we don't give up. Because there are more women in decision-making spaces now than they were 50 years ago. And that is because we've continuously been fighting that space. And so this is what I would say to everybody. I think that we need, as women, we need to lock arms, right? So we need to deliberately and consciously ensure that we are looking at helping helping younger women, for example, if or other women to come into those spaces. I've come into this space because over the course of my career, I have had a lot of support from women networks, women groups, support groups, people who believe in me, who can say, you can do it. I think it's really important to understand that even when you're in that space, you then create those support groups. Of course, there are all those other things like making sure that, we're educating as many of our young people as possible. We are being the role models that they need to be. We ourselves have to create, consciously create opportunities that mean that, young, other people, other women can come in. And we have to remember that what we have in common, beyond being Black, the color of your skin, the part of the continent you come from, your education, your faith, your religious persuasion, we are all women, right? And the more we increase the number of women that are there, but also the feminist approach and understanding of those women, the more likely we are to turn the tables. That would be my answer. And since, am I going to get another chance to speak? Because I just wanted to just remind everybody that, in terms of the peace process, the comprehensive and transformative approach which addresses root causes is critical. Engaging women in decision-making is absolutely important. And for us as women of faith, we need to have a feminist interpretation of all scripture.
Thank you.
We really need to push for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we will respond to the next question, which is addressed to you, Sahin. And it is from Nyaradzai, who is asking about the role of feminist faith leaders in building a culture of peace and in also dealing with and responding to challenges such as arbitrary arrests and challenges related, particularly the human rights defenders, in the context of an ever-increasing, shrinking political space. So over to you, Sahin. You've got 1.5 minutes to answer that question, so I apologize for this. Over to you.
It's okay. Thank you, Dr. Isaiah. I think it's incredibly important that women are at the forefront. And now there's, with the opening of the political space in Ethiopia, there's some work around human rights defenders and defending the defenders. But we're still very far away from women being on the front lines of protecting human rights. And that's partly because of our history. As I mentioned earlier, it's been such a repressive system that we've had on the ground, that you haven't had a lot of women organizing as women or as human rights defenders. And when they have, it's been very much within their own ethnic. Hi, can you hear me now?
Now, yes. Thank you. Go ahead, Sahin.
Hi, not sure if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Sahin, can you hear me? I believe we've lost connection to Sahin. I apologize for that. And if you can hear us, Sahin, please indicate to me and I will give you the chance to finalize your sentence. If not, then we will unfortunately move to the conclusion of our event. Again, we have run out of time indeed, so it is quite unfortunate. But I would like to already say how grateful I am and how grateful the organizers of this event are for the kind of input that we've received from our participants and from our speakers. Indeed, we have progressed several important ideas on how women participation can be improved at all levels, in all sectors, in all parts of the world. I would like once again to thank you panelists, and I would really, really like to encourage all the participants and all the panelists to keep the conversation going. As we've said today and as we've heard today, it is important to create a number of spaces that are safe for these conversations to be had. I would like as well to give a special thanks to our colleagues, particularly Nikki and Marcelo and Christine, who have been in the background sorting out technical issues and putting together this event. And a big thank you as well to our interpreters who have made conversation across different languages possible today. Last but not least, we would really, really like to thank all participants without whom this event would not have been successful at all. As I said, I would really, really encourage you to keep this conversation going. And we hope that your engagement with the Commission on the Status of Women is successful and is inspirational. And we hope that in your own specific context, in your countries, in your communities, and in the international, at the international level, that you as women leaders get the opportunity and the right to lead, because this is your right. Thank you very much.